Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Roger, who's an intermediate photographer from the United States of America. We have the backstory and metadata on this one. Roger created this image at Cannon Beach in Oregon, and Roger worked with a full-frame sensor camera, the Canon 5D. He used a 17 to 40 millimeter zoom lens. He shot this at 22 millimeters, so it's a super wide-angle shot. And Roger did three things here to slow his shutter down to get these motion effects in the surf. He stopped the lens down to f16. He used the lowest ISO setting on this camera, ISO 50, and he used a neutral density filter. Neutral density filter is a filter that blocks light from hitting the sensor of your digital camera. And one of the most popular ways we can think of creatively using a neutral density filter is to do what Roger's done here, block light so that he can get to a slow shutter speed and apply a beautiful motion blur in the shot. And Roger used a specialty neutral density filter that is one of my favorite filters. It's made by Stingray. It's called a Vari ND. It allows you to, on one filter, vary the amount of neutral density from 2 to 8 stops. That does a couple of things for you. It obviously gives you a bunch of different neutral density filter strengths in one filter. It also gives you the ability to open the filter all the way up to its brightest setting, compose your shot, and then if you need a lot more neutral density, stop it down, take the shot, and then open it back up again. With normal neutral density filters, you'd have to take the filters on and off, screw them on and off the front of your lens. We'll put up a link to that particular filter in the information paragraph about this video if you'd like to go find out more about the Vari ND. Let's talk about the elements of visual design in this image. One of the things I love, I've already pointed out, these really beautiful repetitive leading lines of the motion blurs. That kind of hooks up with this dark area out in here in the water, and that leads over to the sea stacks, and then that brings us up to these really beautiful diagonals that move in this direction. So even though there's not a literal S-curve in the image, there's an implied visual pathway that's very powerful, that works with this real powerful quality of line, the S-curve, that can help to move us all the way through images. So beautiful foreground, beautiful qualities of line. I love the fact that Roger shot this in black and white. I think it's a great choice on an overcast day like this, particularly when you have this much definition in the sky. And I'm saying that because this is a big literal scenic shot, and if we were shooting this in color with this soft wraparound light hitting everything, the difference between highlight and shadow and warm and cool light in a color file is one of the things that helps to create the illusion of depth. And so when the light flattens out, it can be hard to create a feeling of depth in a color file. The other thing that's true about just going to black and white in a situation like this where the light is maybe soft or flat, black and white is immediately abstract. And because of that, we have more leeway to manage local and global contrast in the scene, and we don't have to worry about believability when we go to maybe make radical changes in local and global contrast. In color, where all the colors are mutually dependent on each other, it can be harder to get away with those kind of big contrast changes. The other thing I like about this image is just the classical dynamic placement of these two subjects on thirds in the image, and I like the relationship between the two being dynamic. This being bigger, but there being two of these over here. The implied diagonal movement and how that cross-hatches with the feeling of diagonal movement in the clouds. Cross-hatching diagonals is a real sort of classical way to create more depth in an image, create an illusion that the viewer can move into the picture in addition to moving in the two dimensions of sort of across and up and down. When I start to think about improvement for this image, it's really not so much improvement, it's another variation. I'd like to create a variation that for me feels a little bit more balanced and also slows the eye down a little bit. As much as I love this composition, one of the things that's happening for me is that, like most viewers, I'm going to go to the area of highest contrast first. So in this scene, no matter where I would start to look at this, I quickly get pulled over here. And when I get pulled over here, there's real high contrast. There's also a corner that's almost cut off here, comes very close to being cut off. And so if I get pulled out into here, there's nothing to stop me. It just keeps getting brighter and brighter all the way to the corner. And if I try to come back, it's hard to get past this real hard line that's really the difference between almost pure white and pure black. And so that's one area of the image I'd like to change. I'd like to, sorry about that, I'd like to darken this down just a little bit, or a good bit in here, And I'd also like to create some feeling of form and movement that can bring the eye back. And I'm going to end up sort of pushing this to an extreme by changing the image content over here and also creating a rhythm between the form that's here, and form that's here. So there's even another level of encouraging the viewer, if they get over here, to ping pong back and forth and to move back through the image. The other thing that I'd like to do, that I just mentioned, is to open this up. So see, when I look at the image right now, in addition to this area pulling me out, something else is happening. There's sort of a flat space shape here that's very dark. The bottom is divided into two areas that are, one is very dark and one is very light. And then this area up in here, for me, even though there's some form in there, is pretty gray. And what I'd like to do is, by changing local contrast and lightening and darkening, I'd like to at one time slow the viewer down a little bit and create a little bit more of a feeling of cohesiveness or visual unity. When I think about balance in the most basic sense, particularly in a big shot like this, I literally would just sort of do a drill in my mind where I'm looking through the camera, trying to see the image like it's going to be printed, and think, what is my balance like from top to bottom? What is it like from side to side? What is it like moving on the major diagonals? And then I may go a lot further than that. I might start thinking about minor diagonals or balance from here to here, so on and so forth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on two layers that combine a lot of adjustments, and to show you the look that I'm going for here, talk a little bit more about it. And then if you visit the Digital Darkroom this week on the Mindful Eye, you'll see a tutorial that I've created where I specifically show you how I made some of these adjustments. The first layer that I'm going to turn on is a combination of a couple of curves adjustments where I did the most basic things that I talked about. And you can see here that I came in, I darkened this corner, I created a little more form and contrast in here so this wasn't as flat gray. I created more contrast in here and brought these values out so this wasn't as just sort of flat black. And I've added a little bit more detail in here. And now in this next layer, I'm really going to push that even further. I'm going to darken this down, I'm going to lighten this up, and I'm going to heavily manipulate the photograph, which some people won't like. In addition to opening this way up, I'm going to take this sky, cut it out, flip it, put it over here to create more of a feeling of rhythm from this to this to this. So let me go ahead and turn that layer on. And I'm going to turn this on and off a couple of times. And this is a lot of manipulation. It won't be some people's cup of tea, but the main reason that I wanted to work with this image today, and the takeaway, is just in the most basic sense, how contrast, local contrast, can really drive a lot more of a feeling of apparent form, which can slow the viewer down. It can give them more of a feeling of depth and moving over and around and under and through things. And we can also work with local contrast and overall contrast in a very powerful way to create more of a feeling of visual unity or cohesiveness, if in fact that's what we're going for. So here's where we started, and here is where we ended up. And I love Roger's version of this shot. Very beautiful framing, a great use of motion, and really beautiful use of quality of line. And I want to thank Roger for submitting this image to the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. See you tomorrow, everybody.